Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in my series reading Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Oliver Twist as read by Lord Naren White. The interesting communication was addressed to Mrs. Maylie, who received it very graciously. While it was being conveyed to her, the doctor slipped out of the room. "Ah," said Mr. Blathers, not holding his wine glass by the stem, but grasping the bottom between the thumb and forefinger of his left hand, and placing it in front of his chest. "I've seen many good pieces of business like this in my time, ladies." "That crack down in the back lane at Edmonton, Blathers," said Mr. Duff, assisting his colleague's memory. "It wasn't something in this way, weren't it?" rejoined Mr. Blathers. "That was done by Conky Chickweed, that was." "You always gave that to him," replied Duff. "It was the family pet. I tell you, Conky, hadn't any more to do with it than I had." "Get out," retorted Mr. Blathers. "I know better. Do you mind that time when Conky was robbed of his money then? What a start that was. Better than any novel book I ever see." "What was that?" inquired Rose, anxious to encourage any symptoms of good humor in the unwelcome visitors. "It was a robbery, miss, that hardly anybody would have been down upon," said Blathers. "This here Conky Chickweed—" "Conky means nosy, ma'am," interposed Duff. "Of course the lady knows that, don't she?" demanded Blathers. "Always interrupting you are, partner. This here Conky Chickweed, miss, kept a public house over Battlebridge Way, and he had a cellar where a good many young lords went to see cockfighting and badger drawing and that, and a very intellectual manner the sports was conducted in. For I've seen him often. He weren't one of the family, and at that time, and one night he was robbed of 327 guineas in a canvas bag that was stole out of his bedroom, in the dead of night, by a tall man with a black patch over his eye, who had concealed himself under the bed, and after committing the robbery jumped out of a slap window which was only a story high. He was very quick about it, but Conky was quick too, for he fired a blunderbuss at him and roused the neighborhood. They set up a hue and cry directly, and when they came to look about him, he found that Conky had hit the robber, for there were traces of blood, all the while to some palings a good distance off, and they lost him. However, he had made off with the blunt, and consequently the name of Mr. Chickweed, licensed whittler, appeared in the Gazette among the other bankrupts, and all manner of benefits and subscriptions, and I don't know what all, was got up for the poor man, who was in a very low state of mind about his loss, and went up and down the streets for 3 or 4 days, pulling his hair off in such a desperate manner that many people was afraid he might be going to make away with himself. One day he came up to the office, all in a hurry, and had a private interview with the magistrate, who, after a deal of talk, rings the bell and orders Jem Spires in. Jem was a active officer, and tells him to go and assist Mr. Chickweed in apprehending the man as robbed his house. "I see him, Spires," said Chickweed. "Passed my house yesterday morning." "Why didn't you up and collar him?" says Spires. "I was so struck all of a heap that you might have fractured my skull with a toothpick," says the poor man, "but was sure to have him, for between 10 and 11 o'clock at night he passed again." Spires no sooner heard this than he put some clean linen and a comb in his pocket, in case he should have to stop a day or two, and away he goes, and sets himself down at one of the public-house windows behind the little red curtain with his hat on, all ready to bolt out at a moment's notice. He was smoking his pipe here, late at night, when all of a sudden Chickweed roars out. "Here he is! Stop! Thief! Murder!" Jem Spires dashes out, and there he sees Chickweed, a-tearing down the street full cry. Away goes Spires, on goes Chickweed, round turns the people. Everybody roars out, "Thieves!" and Chickweed himself keeps on shouting all the time, like mad. Spires loses sight of him in a minute as he turns a corner, shoots round, sees a little crowd, dives in. Which is the man? Damn me, says Chickweed. I've lost him again. It was a remarkable occurrence, but he weren't to be seen nowhere. So they went back to the public house. Next morning, Spires took his old place and looked out from behind the curtain. For a tall man with a black patch over his eye, till his own two eyes ached again. At last he couldn't help shutting them to ease him a minute, and the very moment he did so, he hears Chickweed roaring out, "Here he is!" Off he starts once more with Chickweed halfway down the street ahead of him, and twice after as long a run as the yesterday's one. The man's lost again. This was done once or twice more, till one half the neighbours gave out that Mr. Chickweed had been robbed by the devil, who was playing tricks with him afterwards, and the other half that poor Mr. Chickweed had gone mad with grief. "What did Jem Spires say?" inquired the doctor, who had returned to the room shortly after the commencement of the story. "Jem Spires," resumed the officer, "for a long time said nothing at all, and listened to everything without seeming to, which showed he understood his business. But one morning he walked into the bar, and taking out his snuff-box, says, 'Chickweed, I found out who done this here robbery.' 'Have you?' said Chickweed. 'Oh, my dear Spires, only let me have vengeance, and I shall die contented. Oh, my dear Spires, where is the villain? Come,' said Spires, offering him a piece of snuff. 'None of that gammon. You did it yourself.' So he had, and a good bit of money he had made by it, too. And nobody would never have found it out if he hadn't been so precious anxious to keep up appearances," said Mr. Blathers, putting down his wine-glass and clinking the handcuffs together. "Very curious indeed," observed the doctor. "Now, if you please, you can walk upstairs." "If you please, sir," returned Mr. Blathers. Closely following Mr. Losberne, the two officers ascended to Oliver's bedroom, Mr. Giles preceding the party with a lighted candle. Oliver had been dozing, but looked worse, and was more feverish than he had appeared yet. Being assisted by the doctor, he managed to sit up in bed for a minute or so, and looked at the strangers without at all understanding what was going forward. In fact, without seeming to recollect where he was or what had been passing. "This," said Mr. Losberne, speaking softly, but with great vehemence notwithstanding, "this is the lad who, being accidentally wounded by a spring gun in some boyish trespass on Mr. What-d'ye-call-him's grounds at the back there, comes to the house for assistance this morning, and is immediately laid hold of and maltreated by that ingenious gentleman with a candle in his hand, who has placed his life in considerable danger, as I can professionally certify." Messrs. Blathers and Duff looked at Mr. Giles, as he was thus recommended to their notice. The bewildered butler gazed from them towards Oliver, and from Oliver towards Mr. Losberne, with the most ludicrous mixture of fear and perplexity. "You don't mean to deny that, I suppose?" said the doctor, laying Oliver gently down again. "It was all done for the best, for the best, sir," answered Giles. "I am sure I thought it was the boy, or I wouldn't have meddled with him. I am not of an inhuman disposition, sir." "Thought it was what boy?" inquired the senior officer. "The housebreaker's boy, sir," replied Giles. They certainly had a boy." "Well, do you think so now?" inquired Blathers. "Think what now?" replied Giles, looking vacantly at his questioner. "Think it's the same boy, stupid head," rejoined Blathers impatiently. "I don't know, I really don't know," said Giles, with a rueful countenance. "I couldn't swear to him." "What do you think?" asked Mr. Blathers. "I don't know what to think," replied poor Giles. "I don't think it is the boy. Indeed, I'm almost certain that it isn't. You know it can't be." Has this man been a-drinking, sir?" inquired Blathers, turning to the doctor. "What a precious muddle-headed chap you are," said Duff, addressing Mr. Giles with supreme contempt. Mr. Losberne had been feeling the patient's pulse during this short dialogue, but he now rose from the chair by the bedside and remarked that if the officers had any doubts upon the subject, they would perhaps like to step into the next room and have brittles before them. And we'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.